In this video, we're finishing up the TryHackMe pre-security path by walking through Windows. This is a three-part series, and by the end of this, we should have a strong grasp of Windows. So let's dive right on it. First, as a precursor, you can walk through this on your own on TryHackMe. I highly encourage you to do so. There are some interactive labs and challenges that you can do, and it also gamifies the learning and gives you something a bit more applicable to do as you're watching this video. Now, what is Windows? You're probably very familiar with what Windows is. In fact, you're probably watching this video right now on a Windows computer if you're not watching it on your phone. Windows is the most used operating system in the world, and it's gone through so many iterations, and it's been around for decades. And so, as you can probably imagine, in the security world, it's notorious for vulnerabilities, but that's not necessarily Windows' fault. It's really just a symptom of how widespread its use is and how much attention attackers give to it simply because of its widespread use. That's basically to say that if Windows or Mac OS was the most used operating system in the world, then those would probably be flush with vulnerabilities as well that we know of. Now, the most recent version of Windows is actually Windows 11, and it mentions here that Windows 11 is current and live, but Windows 10 is probably going to be the most widely used at-home operating system. Sometimes you'll come across Windows 8, and other times you might even come across Windows 7 or Windows XP. In fact, it's not even unheard of for Windows Vista, even when this is filmed in 2022, to still be used. So it's frightening. Now, real quick, let's walk through the GUI, and you're probably familiar with the GUI, so we're just gonna fly through it. But the main things to keep in mind are, of course, the desktop, the start menu, the search box, the task view, taskbar, toolbars, and the notification area. Again, you're probably already very familiar with what these are, but you can actually personalize your desktop using the settings. The start menu is where you're gonna find pretty much anything that's on your machine. And actually from the start menu, you can use the search bar, and that allows you to basically search your computer. And if it isn't already installed, then it'll actually search the internet for something specific. If you have a favorite app, you can pin it to the taskbar. That's a nice way to kind of shortcut access to different applications that you like. And then of course you'll have the notification area, which will tell you very important messages that you need to know. Now let's talk about the Windows file system, or the new technology file system. As it says on TryHackMe, NTFS is known as a journaling file system. In case of failure, the file system can automatically repair the folders or files on a disk using the information in log files. This also allows for files larger than 4 gigabytes. Imagine not being able to store a file larger than 4 gigabytes. That would be so frustrating. You can also set specific permissions per folder or file, which is great. You can also compress folders and files, which really helps for storage efficiency. And then of course, you can encrypt your files. There's a number of permissions that you can set on a folder or file basis, including read, write, read and execute, list folder contents, modify, and full control. And these are different permissions that you can set on a user by user basis. So say you have a number of users on a specific Windows machine, and you want some to be able to read, some to be able to write, some to be able to modify, etc. These are things that you can do to be able to have some good identity and access management. And you can do all of these on the Properties tab on each file or folder. Now let's talk about Windows System 32, and these are going to be very, very important because this is where your operating system is loaded from. These will include information on all kinds of environment variables that you'll need to be able to use for your operating system and more. So obviously you want to make sure that this is backed up somewhere in case something in here were to be corrupted. Your operating system would probably have a hard time loading. So if you can have your operating system stored on a thumb drive that you can boot from, or a disk that you can recover from, that really wouldn't be a bad idea. Long story short, don't do anything with System 32. Just don't touch it. It is very important, and you don't want to break anything in there, because if you do, yeah, your computer might be broken. Now let's talk about user accounts, profiles, and permissions. And this is where things can get pretty customizable on a per machine basis. Here you can basically create new accounts for new users that will want access to this specific machine, and you can modify their permission set. So maybe you don't want them to have access to every single application, or you want them to have limited access to different applications and folders and files. This is where you can do that. And you can do all of this in the settings tab, where you add a user, and then you basically you specify what kind of user you want them to be, and you allow your computer some time to be able to build that account. If you're running this on a network and maybe you're inside of an Active Directory, this is all stuff that you can tie into Active Directory as well. Another important principle is user account control, and this basically allows a user to run important and admin and administrator tasks without having to be logged in as the administrator. And this basically prevents you from really badly breaking anything on your machine and also giving users too much control on a system. And again, these are all things that you can configure within the settings or the properties tab of a specific user. Next, let's talk about the control panel, because this gives you a lot of flexibility and control over your system, the different devices that your system is using. Really, you want to be pretty familiar with your control panel, especially if you're wanting to like plug something in or you have a driver issue, something like that. We'll kind of break down some of the options that you have within the control panel. You have system and security, network and internet, hardware, programs, user accounts, appearance and personalization, clock and region, and ease of access. And as you can see, within this, there are so many different controls that you have at your disposal. And this really allows you to customize your experience within Windows. Pretty much, if you have any kinds of issues from networking to different devices not working to the time, that you can really modify things within the control panel to try to troubleshoot and get things working again. And finally, that takes us to Task Manager, and this is going to be a great place to be able to identify where your CPU is being utilized and give you the flexibility to kill processes that are taking up too much CPU that you aren't actually using. So if you notice different processes running here in Task Manager that you think might actually even be malicious, then that's something that you can also drill down into. Note that you'll have processes running in the foreground and the background. Basically, that means that if it's in the foreground, then it might be something that you're interacting with, and if it's in the background, then it's something that the CPU is running, but you're not really having to do anything to keep it going. So with that, we're going to jump into phase 2 of Windows. Now let's talk about system configuration, and this is where you can get a lot of customization options on your experience within Windows. But this also gives you a lot of options when trying to troubleshoot startup problems. So if you go down to your taskbar and you type in msconfig, you'll have the option for system configuration, and you can kind of look through here to kind of see what is going on. But there are 5 tabs that you can use to investigate: General, Boot, Services, Startup, and Tools. In the General tab, we'll see some of the more general settings for your machine's boot up process. In Boot, we will actually see where it is booting up from. So by default, it should be /Windows in the C drive. In the Services tab, you'll see a lot of the services that run in the background and their state. In the Startup tab, you may or may not see anything. So, I mean, definitely check it out on your own system and see if you see anything interesting. They note on the VM that you won't see anything interesting, and they show a screenshot, which, I mean, doesn't really show anything either. And then of course in the Tools tab, you have different kinds of tools that you can use on your system. Now in the last video, we talked about user account control, and you can actually set some of the actual user account control settings to actually have different experiences and different security settings and so forth with every different user. They do note, don't turn these settings off, definitely don't. But here they show a picture of the slider that pops up, and that basically will dictate when you are notified or how often you're notified when programs or applications are changed. Next, let's go to computer management. And this is actually another very important place to remember while you're on Windows, because there's a lot of settings and customization tools here that really you want to be able to be aware of and use. For instance, you'll have system tools, you'll have storage, and then you'll have service and applications. And inside of each one of those categories, you have a bevy of other kinds of options. So within system tools, you can see you have task manager, event viewer, and some more options. In storage, you have disk management. That's where you can partition parts of your disk if you'd like different partitions. It's really, there's a lot of options at your disposal to make changes to your Windows machine. One of the important ones that you want to know about is event viewer, and that basically allows you to view some of the events that are going on your machine. Sounds pretty straightforward. There are also options to check out some of the logs on your machine. You can also check out some of the shared folders. There's also a performance monitor that you can check to make sure everything's running efficiently. So that's pretty cool. And then of course you have the device manager, which will show your device and then any kinds of other devices. Maybe you have like a keyboard or a monitor or something like that attached to your machine. And this is where you can kind of check those out and make sure that everything is working properly. Sometimes you might have an issue where a Bluetooth device isn't working, or for instance, if you're gaming and you have a game controller and it's not working properly, you might want to check the device monitor and check some of the settings. Maybe there's a driver that might be disabled. That's a common issue there. Under the storage settings, you can see some of the different disk management options, and here of course you can partition different parts of your disk. If say you want to have a separate partition specifically for something, this is where you can do that. There's a ton of other settings, so just kind of look around in here, make sure that you don't make any changes unless you know exactly what you're trying to accomplish. You don't want to break anything. That would be very, very bad. Next, let's talk about system information, and this is per Microsoft. Windows includes a tool called Microsoft System Information. You can find this with msinfo32.exe. This tool gathers information about your computer and displays a comprehensive view of your hardware, system components, and software environment, which you can use to diagnose computer issues. That's a pretty powerful tool that you can definitely use while troubleshooting. Say there's a problem, this might be a good option to check out. And of course, you have the system summary, hardware resources, components, and software environment, each with their own options that you can use to be able to diagnose things. One of the other important things to keep in mind is something called environment variables, and this is from Microsoft. Environment variables store information about the operating system environment. This information includes details such as the operating system path, the number of processors used by the operating system, and the location of temporary folders. The environment variables store data that is used by the operating system and other programs. For example, the Windows environment or Windows directory environment variable contains the location of the Windows installation directory. Programs can query the value of this variable to determine where Windows operating system files are located. And you can see that in the software environment tab. And it will have all kinds, as you can see, of information that you can look at. Next, we can talk about the resource monitor. And this is where you can kind of get an idea on how much resources different processes are using on your CPU. And you'll be able to see the process ID, the name, how much CPU is actually being utilized, the description of the process, how, the status of the process itself, how many threads are being run. So this is a pretty comprehensive breakdown of processes that are running, and that can be very, very handy when trying to troubleshoot resource-intensive tasks that might be bogging your system down. There's a number of categories here that are really just giving you different information pieces about running tasks, but definitely work your way through here in case this is, something that you're going to want to work with in the future while trying to troubleshoot different programs that are running on your system. Again, this will show everything from both the CPU, the network utilization, the disk utilization. It's pretty awesome. Next, you have everybody's favorite thing, the command prompt, and this is where you can input commands into Windows. Some basic commands is who am I, similar to on Linux, where it basically will just return what user account you're running as. The host name, which will return what the name of the actual machine is. On Linux, we typed in ifconfig to get the IP address of our system, and other networking information. But on Windows, you type ipconfig. So a little confusing, but it'll basically display all the same stuff. If you want to check ongoing network connections, you can use the netstack command, and there's a number of flags that you can use to get specific pieces of information. And there's even more commands that you can use in Windows that are all pretty awesome. But before we wrap this up, let's talk about the registry editor. This, as Microsoft says, is a central hierarchical database used to store information necessary to configure the system for one or more users, applications, and hardware devices. The registry contains information that Windows continually references during operations such as profiles, applications installed, property sheet settings, the hardware, and ports being used. So a pretty comprehensive breakdown, and that's really handy to be able to get information on users and other things like that. TryHackMe does leave a warning here that this is used for advanced usage, and making changes can affect the normal computer operation. So definitely bear that in mind when you're trying to make edits on here, that you're actually going to be impacting how the machine functions. So definitely be careful, make sure that you know what you're doing while you're making changes. And that will be the end of part 2. So let's jump into Windows updates, a very important factor with Windows security. Some of you may be familiar with the term on Patch Tuesday, and that is a great way to make sure that you are standardizing when and how often you are patching your systems. And you can do that in Windows Update. Now, Microsoft regularly releases updates, and so you can actually automatically install those updates, but in large environments where different updates might bring configuration problems to your environment, it might not be a good idea to have automatic updates on. But for personal use, just, set it and forget it. Make sure that your machine is running and you'll be good to go. But you can check that out in the settings, and then you'll see updates, and then you'll see update and security. I like that they pair those together. You can check for updates, but it will tell you if there are no updates available, which is what you want to see. If there is an update there, install that update. Install that right now. And along with updates, let's talk about security. Now, by default, you will have Windows security and its own kind of built-in security system, but you can also install third-party apps like McAfee and other kinds of apps, and those will integrate pretty well, but you won't necessarily be worse off if you're also just using the standard Windows security as well. Here you get, kind of all the things you like to see. You get virus and threat protection, a firewall, app and browser control, and device security. It's not bad. You can also customize which one of those you want turned on and off. I obviously would recommend turning all of them on, but sometimes people turn things off, and that's how attackers get in. So let that be a lesson. But let's dive into virus and threat protection. You can run virus scans from here, so that's pretty cool. You can run quick and full scans. Really, that just means that quick will run the commonly used and important folders, and full will run every single folder on your machine. And basically what that's looking for is it's looking for threat signatures, or basically unique bits of code or identifiers to malware that have been shared amongst the world pretty much by security researchers. And that will tip your computer off to the presence of certain malware. Now, know that that isn't perfect. On things called 0 days, which are 0-day vulnerabilities, meaning they're very new, they're brand new, there may not yet be signatures that have been shared for those, especially if it is, extremely new. Usually signatures are released pretty quickly, but again, just know if it's a novel kind of malware, it may not get picked up on a scan. But this will not only scan whenever you tell it to, it might scan on regular intervals, it might scan folders that you're installing onto your system. It's a good idea to leave this turned on. Next, you have firewall and network protection, and by this point you should know what a firewall is, but if you don't, the firewall basically filters network connections and other kinds of things. But we did cover that already in this playlist, so if you aren't familiar, just go through the TryHackMe pre-security playlist on my channel, and I'll link you to it actually at the end of this video. But you get one on here, so that's pretty rad. You can also customize the firewall and make sure that you can have an allow list and a block list. That's not bad. Next, let's go to app and browser control. And this will basically allow, Windows security to be able to check for files that might be installed or links that might be available to click on in different apps and your browser. And that will basically keep you secure while you're browsing online. If there's a link or file that they believe to be malicious or suspect, they will warn you before you actually click on it, or right after you click it and before you are actually connected to the destination. Another good thing to keep enabled. Next, you have device security, and this basically shows how your device itself is maintained. And as they mention here on TryHackMe, you're probably not going to either need to or want to change a lot of these settings, but we'll cover it. You get core isolation, which is good for virtualization. You get security for your processor, and you can also get some information on your processor. Next, BitLocker, and this is also very, very important, and that will encrypt your file system anytime you are not using your computer. So say your computer gets stolen, the attacker will not be able to access any of the sensitive files or folders or anything on your machine because everything is encrypted. And you will basically input a BitLocker pin or a passcode or passphrase preferably whenever you're logging onto your machine, and that will decrypt the BitLocker drive for your account, and then you can access your machine. This is a great little layer of security that you absolutely should have turned on. Next, you get the volume shadow copy service, and this can be a great way to get snapshots of your machine. So in case something gets corrupted, you can restore back to a shadow copy. So this will basically specify, when you want to create, your restoration image, when, you can perform that restoration, you can configure how you want the restoration to occur, and you can also delete the images themselves if they're starting to get too bulky on your machine. It's a great little added layer of security for your system that you probably might want to have. And with all that, that is the end of Windows, and that is the end of the pre-security pathway. So if this playlist has been helpful, let me know down in the comments below. If you are interested in learning more about cybersecurity, there's a Cybersecurity 101 playlist up top. Definitely dive into that, because now I think that you are prepared for a lot of those concepts. Those build on what we talked about in this playlist. And if there's anything that we talked about in this video, such as firewalls, that maybe you're not familiar with, either check that out or check out the rest of the pre-security pathway and work your way through it. This will be a great way for you to learn and practice if you're practicing on TryHackMe as well. And like and comment because you like me, right? Have a good one.